Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Macbeth. In this short video, I'm going to be telling you everything that you need to know about the character of Macduff. For every slide of the presentation, there'll be an aspect of his personality and presentation, as well as some key quotes. This means I'll be able to take you through interesting features of language structure and form, and I'll also keep you in the loop about any relevant context, so we can hit all of your assessment objectives in one go. With that said, let's get started. The first thing that we need to talk about in terms of Macduff's character is his loyalty. He is positioned from the very, very beginning as good, a hero, and a clear allegiance to Duncan. We don't actually meet him until after Duncan's death. His first sort of opening is in Act 2, Scene 2, even though we don't know it's him, when we start to hear the knocking on the door. Shakespeare is pointing to the fact that Macduff is our hero, because from the moment that Macbeth kills Duncan, Macduff is on the scene. So that knocking that sort of torments them at the end of the scene, Act 2, Scene 2, continues then into Act 2, Scene 3. So it is Macduff knocking at that door, symbolically demonstrating that he is going to be the one hounding, chasing Macbeth and trying to bring back order to the world. He is also the first person to actually find King Duncan, and his response is it's just so massive. He says, "Oh, horror, 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 tongue nor heart cannot conceive nor name thee." This absolute kind of shock and disbelief that renders him, speechless when he says tongue cannot name thee. Note that little bit of personification. But his heart cannot conceive. So it's like every part of him can't kind of get his head around the horror that he has seen. And then he says, "Confusion now hath made his masterpiece." Brilliant bit of personification in that exclamative sentence there. "Most sacrilegious murder hath broke open the Lord's anointed temple and stole thence the life of the building." This metaphor is absolutely wonderful, and it's a really good place to draw in some context, because as I'm sure you already know, the Jacobean audience believed fervently in the divine right of kings, the idea that God had chosen Duncan as his vessel on earth. And in the order of being, you've got God at the top, and then right underneath him is his king. And so that's why this murder is sacrilegious. It goes against God, and it has broken the Lord's anointed temple, stole the life of the building being Duncan himself. So this demonstrates here Macduff's goodness, and it also starts, I suppose, this journey that he is on, ultimately being the one to conquer Macbeth. Macduff is suspicious of Macbeth right from word go. From the very moment that Macbeth kills the guards, it is Macduff that questions. So here Macbeth says, "Oh, yet I do repent me of my fury that I did kill them," the guards. Macduff: "Wherefore did you so?" Wherefore means why, by the way. So that interrogative question there again reminds us that, or introduces to us, because this is kind of early doors with Macduff, it introduces us to the fact that he questions things. He's not willing just to accept what Macbeth says. And actually, because of this early suspicion, he makes the very bold move to not go to Macbeth's coronation. So this is Macduff and Ross just having a little chinwag about the situation. And Ross says, "Will you to Scone," which is where the coronation, and he says, no, I'm going to go to Fife. And then Macduff says, "Well, may you see things well done there. Adieu, lest our old robes sit easier than our new." So this is a brilliant metaphor to draw attention to, because earlier in the play we've already seen this metaphor of clothes being status. Macbeth says, "Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" earlier on. And Macduff is saying, "Well, I hope it all goes okay in case our old robes," so metaphor for like their old way, their old position, sit easier than our new. So he's basically saying, because he's basically saying we might find that life in the old way under Duncan is going to be easier, or was easier, than what we're about to face. So he knows that bad times are coming. And so he certainly does become Macbeth's enemy from this point forward. After his coronation and the feast where Macbeth sees Banquo's ghost, Macduff's absence is notable, which is why Lennox is talking about it in Act 3, Scene 6. Note here, we're at the stage where Lennox is even referring to Macbeth as the tyrant, but there's still this sense that, if you disobey, then yeah, you're going to live in disgrace. Obviously, what Lennox doesn't know is how much worse it's going to get. In Act 4, Scene 1, Macbeth returns to visit the witches because he wants to know more about his future. And that is when we get these 3 prophecies that really cement his fate, because these are the prophecies that fuel his violence, fuel his hubris, that kind of incredible overconfidence, and points to Macduff. So this is the first apparition's prophecy. Macbeth, Macbeth, Macbeth. Beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife. So you've got that lovely repetition, imperative verb, beware, beware, marking Macduff out as his enemy in that moment. Now, even though the prophecies do make Macbeth feel invincible because they tell him none of woman born shall harm Macbeth, he still decides that he wants to kill off Macduff just in case. So first you get, then live Macduff, what need I fear of thee? So that rhetorical question demonstrating that sense of his hubris or his overconfidence. And then he goes back on it, but yet I'll make assurance double sure and take a bond of fate. Thou shalt not live. So again, we get this sort of fixation. And here's another reason that Macduff is so important. He really represents just how tyrannical and cruel Macbeth becomes. Now, he discovers at the end of Act 4, Scene 1 that Macduff has already left Scotland, that Macduff has gone to England. So he knows full well that Macduff is not at home. Yet he says, the castle of Macduff I will surprise, seize upon Fife, give to the edge of the sword his wife, his babes, and all unfortunate souls that trace him in his line. He decided that he was going to kill Macduff. Because he cannot kill Macduff, in his mind, the next best thing is wiping everyone out. It's such needless cruelty. And note the way that that cruelty is emphasised by this lovely triad or list of 3, if you prefer, his wife, his babes, so again reminding us of the youth of his children, and all unfortunate souls that trace him in his line. That's really interesting. It's like he wants to obliterate future lines for Macduff. This is something that is a sore spot for him, isn't it? Because he doesn't have an heir. That's why he was so upset about Banquo and Banquo's children becoming kings, because he doesn't have that sense of progression in his family line. That's what he wants to do to Macduff. I mentioned before that Macduff and Macbeth are sort of opposites. There's a kind of sense of them being like that Macduff is like the foil to Macbeth. And I think one of the quite interesting comparisons is their kind of roles as husbands. Now, in Act 4, Scene 2, the scene where the Macduff family are killed, the very beginning of the scene, Lady Macduff is really, really angry with her husband, upset with her husband. And she says, wisdom to leave his wife, to leave his babes. Note the way that those words are repeated from what Macbeth said, reminding us of their fate. His mansion and his titles, in a place from whence himself does fly. she's like, how could that possibly be considered wise? And you've got this lovely listing with a little bit of anaphora here, repeating at the beginning of the clauses this verb to leave, so emphasizing her feeling of abandonment, that she's left her, he's left the children, their home, and all of the people that are under him in a place that he thinks he shouldn't be. So the fact that she uses the metaphor fly here almost suggests a sense of panic or fear. And then look at the contrast here in this declarative sentence. After this sort of long rhetorical question, we then just get, he loves us not. So she comes to the conclusion that he can't possibly love her, which is a dreadful thing that she's feeling, particularly as she's about, she's about to die. But the fact is that actually, whether or not she feels that way is fair enough. But Macduff's love for Lady Macduff, I think, is really, really presented beautifully and devastatingly in Act 4, Scene 3. So first off, you have his awful shock, and you get this sort of devastating little zoomorphic metaphor or animalistic metaphor, where he refers to his family as all my pretty chickens, all my pretty ones. Did you say all? Note the repetition of all in this case. All my pretty ones, all what? All my pretty chickens, and they're down at one fell swoop. So you can see that love there. But then what happens is he starts thinking about responsibility. So first, did heaven look on and would not take their part? So at first he's angry with heaven, personified heaven, saying, well, hang on a minute, why didn't heaven intervene? But then he answers his own question. Sinful Macduff, they were all struck for thee. So you get this kind of sense of remorse here that he feels because he knows that he left them. So yes, Lady Macduff is upset and she feels that he doesn't love her because he has put his country ahead of his kind of personal life. He's put the public domain in front of private domain. But actually, his regret really demonstrates it. I said before about comparing it to Macbeth. Think about after Lady Macbeth has died. She should have died hereafter. There would have been time for such a word. Do have a little look at my video on that scene if you want a little bit more detail. But Macbeth isolates himself from his wife, and you see that love seemingly deteriorate. It's a possible interpretation. There are others. But here, I think the contrast is fairly major. And this idea about his loyalty is really, really important as well. The next scene where we see him in England with Act 4, Scene 3, with Malcolm in Act 4, Scene 3, Malcolm puts his loyalty to the test. It's a very strange scene where Malcolm basically tells him that he is worse than Macbeth, and were he to become king, he would steal everyone's land, steal everyone's money, have sex with everyone's wives, and generally just be the worst king ever created. And Macduff responds as such, O nation miserable, with an untitled tyrant bloody sceptred, when shalt thou see thy wholesome days again? So he's desperate, and he's thinking only of Scotland. So he basically says, right, well, I can't support you either. We're now in a situation where, we've got one tyrant on the throne and we've got another one, coming up. And Malcolm then goes, oh, kidding, I was just checking that you were more loyal to Scotland than you are to any individual man. And that is why Macduff left his wife, because he is trying to save Scotland. And making him the hero. If you think Macbeth is a sort of anti-hero, Macduff is the hero. Here we have this delightful picture of him holding Macbeth's head. But this is the sort of amazing climactic moment where we really understand the true significance of Macduff. because Macbeth was told in Act 4, Scene 1, that he lived a charmed life because none of woman born would harm Macbeth. And here is the reveal where Macduff says, well, despair thy charm, and let the angel whom thou still hast served tell thee, Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped, i.e. born from C-section, so not actually physically born by his mother. Instead, he was removed by a doctor. Note the way that Shakespeare uses enjambment to set untimely ripped on the new line. It's so powerful, so powerful. So this is how we know that he is our hero. He is the one that is going to conquer. And there in Act 5, Scene 9, there he appears, holding Macbeth's head. Hail, King, for so thou art. So he says that to Malcolm. It is him that has restored order. Macduff has restored peace and order. And there he holds the usurper's cursed head. The time is free, I see thee compassed with thy kingdom's pearl, that speak my salutation in their minds, whose voices I desire aloud with mine. Hail, King of Scotland. Hooray! Now it's interesting that it is Macduff that saves the day, allowing Malcolm to reclaim the throne, because of course this is what the witches predicted. Now this might be a strange old link, and I apologise if it is, but I was reading Harry Potter the other day. I was rereading, and I got to that bit where Dumbledore explains to Harry the notion of a prophecy, and how Voldemort basically made the prophecy come true by marking Harry as his equal. And as I read it, I thought, oh, that's just like Macbeth, because actually it is Macbeth acting upon the fear of Macduff that leads Macduff to have this desire, this personal thirst for revenge and for justice. And perhaps if Macbeth had never gone near his family, would he have been as motivated? Interesting thought. And there I will leave it for you. So all is left to say is thank you so much for watching. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, do have a little look at the other videos in this series where you can get PowerPoints on Macbeth, Lady Macbeth and Banquo, as well as a range of themes. There is also a playlist with scene-by-scene tutorials for every single scene in Macbeth. So very useful for revision, or if you've missed the odd lesson, you can fill in the gaps. If you haven't subscribed already, click that button please. Thank you so much again for watching, and all that is left is to say happy revising.